Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is the next in our series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century, and we're currently looking at money and wealth and possessions and what the Bible has to say about it. In the last video we looked at two parables that Jesus told about, which gave his reaction and his understanding, what we could see about his attitude towards wealth. There is another parable that I want to look at, which has a lot to say about wealth and is perhaps the strangest of all Jesus's parables. And it's a parable in which every character is a rogue. And it's the parable usually called the parable of the unjust servant. And it's found in the book of Luke chapter 16 verses 1 to 13. And I'm going to read that now. Luke chapter 16 verses 1 to 13, the parable of the unjust servant. He also said to his disciples, that's Jesus speaking now, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be a steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I am ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their household. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward, because he had dwelt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Very interesting parable that. So this parable tells how a steward was discovered to be dishonest and therefore faced the prospect of dismissal. Now in the East, in the ancient world, a steward had unlimited control over his master's property. So with the prospect of dismissal facing him, and with the end of his comfortable life in sight, this steward went one by one to the people who owed his master's debts. He was not yet dismissed, and he had the authority to deal with these debts and debtors. In each case he came to an agreement with the debtor to falsify the account. In each case the debt was recorded as considerably less than it was. Now in this way the steward hoped to be able to gain entry into the household of all the debtors in time to come, partly because they would be grateful to him, and no doubt partly because he was a clever scoundrel, because since he had made them sharers in his lies, basically he had them in his power. And when it's interesting, when his master found out about it, instead of being angry, He looked on it as a clever bit of roguery and congratulated the steward on his shrewdness in providing for his future. Now, it is an extraordinary parable. It is so extraordinary that it is clear that by the time Luke recorded it, its original lesson was lost, because Luke attaches no fewer than 4 different lessons to it, and all of them are relevant to the question of the Christian and his money. So let's look at the lessons which Luke has attached to it. Firstly, he begins with the comment of the Master. The sons of this world are wiser in their own generation than the sons of light, as we read in verse 8. Now, what Luke means by this is that Christians would be very much better Christians if they were as keen to be Christians as the rascal of a steward was to cling on to his comfort of money. It is perfectly true that this would be a very different world, and the church would be a very different church, if so-called Christians put as much time and thought and energy into being Christian as they do into making money, or even their hobby or football. If the Christian put as much effort into maintaining his standards as a Christian as the worldly man puts into maintaining his standards of worldly comfort, he would be a very much better Christian than he is. There are things in which the children of the world can be an example to the children of light. Secondly, his second comment is, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal habitations. That's verse 9. Now, what does that mean? This is quite a difficult thing to understand, but William Lilly, who was a Scottish theologian, seizes on one unmistakable thing about it. He says, and I quote, "Whatever else this means, it teaches that money is to be used as a means and not as an end in itself." End of quote. That's in his Studies in the New Testament Ethics, page 97. It was not the money itself that the steward was interested in. He was interested in the friends which money could win him and the comfort it could ensure for him. It is a cynical view of life. You can buy friendship, and that's the principle behind it. But the whole parable is designed to show how a cynical worldling can in some ways be an example to a Christian. So this tells us that money is meant to be used and not to be kept, and that it must never be regarded as an end in itself, but always as a means to an end. And the end towards which it is a means will be all important. So thirdly, the third lesson is this: he who is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and he who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? Of course, that's verses 10 to 12. So this is a much simpler lesson. It is the principle that a man's conduct in money matters. It is the principle that a man's conduct in money matters is no bad test of the man. If we might almost say, if a man can be trusted with money, he can be trusted with anything. A man's character, his honesty or his dishonesty, his straightness or his crookedness can be seen and nowhere better in his daily business and financial dealings. How does he treat his money? How does he handle his money? The life a man lives in business is in its own way a preparation for eternal life. Interesting, don't you think? So the fourth lesson is this. Okay, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, as we read in verse 13. Now, in Matthew, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount and appears in quite a different context as we read in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. So we may well conclude that Jesus said this more than once. It says quite definitely that there is only room in life for one supreme loyalty, and that supreme loyalty must be to God. And if a man's supreme loyalty is to God, there will never be anything wrong with either the way he makes his money or the way in which he spends it. So that was the parable of the unjust servant. So interesting. So much to learn there. So let me ask you, where is your supreme loyalty? Is it to money? How do you treat your money? How do you look at it? Very, very interesting. Let's continue. There is another place in which we can find guidance about the Christian and his money, and it's the story of the collection which the Apostle Paul made from the Gentile churches for the church at Jerusalem. With Paul, the Apostle Paul, Christianity went out to the Gentiles. It was like a division of labour in the church. Paul went to the Gentiles. And Peter and James and John went to the Jews to preach the gospel to them. So the one thing that the older apostles did was to encourage Paul to remember the poor. And that was something to which he required no urging. And we can read that in Galatians chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. So about 4 or 5 years later, Paul made a plan. Jerusalem was always a poor church, and Paul initiated a movement whereby all the Gentile churches he could contact would join in making a special gift, a special collection for the church at Jerusalem. After all, Jerusalem was the mother church. It was from Jerusalem that the whole Christian religion flowed. And it was very right and proper that the younger churches which had received such spiritual blessings from Jerusalem should give Jerusalem all the material help they could. Now we can put this story together from 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verses 1 to 4 and 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9 and Romans chapter 15 verses 25 to 26. So the first passage, short as it is very instructive for Christian giving through the church. As we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verse 2, on the very first day of the week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that the contributions need not be made when I come. So giving is to be systematic giving, so that there will not have to be a sudden emergency appeal or a special sermon on giving. Far better a regular putting aside than a desperate effort when the deadline is fast approaching. And the giving is to be proportionate. A man is to give as he prospers. The flat rate kind of giving is quite inappropriate, for what may be much for one man is likely to be negligible for another. The giving is to be universal. Each of them was to do it. So often the financial welfare of the congregation depends on the generosity of less than half of its members. It should be something in which all are involved as they are able. So this collection for Jerusalem lay very near to Paul's heart. It was not only of great practical help to Jerusalem, it had a very great symbolic value for the whole church. It stood for at least three things. Number one, it symbolized the oneness of the church. It avoided any atmosphere of congregationalism, just as there must be relationship between individual and individual, so there must be relationship between community and community, between congregation and congregation, between church and church. No congregation must think only of itself. It must be one for all and all for one. It is, for instance, very doubtful if wealthy congregations have any right to embark on schemes for things which are non-essentials, however much artistic value they may have, when there are congregations whose essential work is hindered through lack of funds. Any community whose outlook is limited to its own congregation is not a church. Secondly, it symbolized that the fact that no spectacular manifestation of spiritual gifts can take the place of concern for others. So, put it technically, no number of charismata or spiritual gifts can ever be a substitute for agape, that is Christian love. Now, the Corinthian church was taken up with spectacular things like speaking in tongues, and such things may well lead to spiritual pride instead of love's concern. Thirdly, the third point is well made by R.H. Fuller. This collection symbolized the fact that spiritual fellowship, if it is really genuine, will, and I quote, will always be given material expression in terms of dollars and cents, of pounds, shillings and pence. End of quote. If we talk of the necessity of fellowship with others, that fellowship is quite unreal unless it results in practical giving. Jesus thought it was the very negation of Christianity if kind words and kind thoughts did not become concrete in kind deeds, as we read in James chapter 2 verses 14 and 17. So we've now looked at what the Bible has to say about money and wealth and possessions. In the next video, I want to have a look at if we can see general principles which will guide our own use of money and wealth and possessions. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for joining me in this one. Bye bye.